The lobby fell silent when the old woman stepped inside. Her gray hair was tangled, her clothes worn and stained, and she carried a small, tattered handbag that looked as if it had been through decades of storms. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly done nails and a forced smile, wrinkled her nose at the sight. Guests turned their heads, whispering behind their hands. The old lady looked around timidly, her frail hands clutching her bag. "Excuse me, dear," she said softly to the receptionist. "I need a room for the night. I'll pay in cash." The receptionist's smile faltered. She glanced at the manager standing nearby, a tall man with slicked back hair and a sharp suit. He walked over, his expression cold. "Ma'am," he said curtly, "I'm afraid we're fully booked." "That's strange," the old woman replied gently. "I saw online you had several rooms available." The manager's lips curled into a smirk. "Our rooms are expensive. Maybe this isn't the right place for you." A few guests snickered. The old woman lowered her eyes, her cheeks turning red. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, turned around, and began to walk out. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy glass door. But before she could leave, a young bellboy named Ryan stepped forward. "Sir," he whispered to the manager, "that was unnecessary. She didn't do anything wrong." The manager shot him a glare. "Mind your business, Ryan. We don't want the lobby smelling like that." The door closed behind the old woman. The staff went back to their routines, gossiping about her appearance. Nobody noticed the black car that pulled up outside moments later. It was a sleek, luxury sedan, completely out of place in the dusty parking lot. 9 minutes later, the same old woman stepped back through the door. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked 2 men in suits, followed by a woman holding a leather folder. The air shifted immediately. The manager blinked, confused, as the old woman's demeanor changed, her back straightened, her voice firm. "Mr. Collins," she said, addressing the manager by name. "I believe we need to talk." "How do you know my—" he began, but then stopped when the woman with the folder handed him a paper. His face drained of color. It was an ownership document. The hotel's ownership document. And at the top of it, in elegant gold letters, was the name Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, the old woman standing before him. The manager stammered. Mrs. Whitmore? You own this hotel?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I bought it 15 years ago. It was part of a foundation project I created to give young workers a chance at employment. I came today unannounced to see how my staff treated their guests. And I must say," she looked around, her voice trembling with disappointment, "I am heartbroken." The receptionist turned pale. The other staff members froze, whispering in shock. Margaret stepped closer to the manager. "You didn't even ask my name. You judged me by my clothes, by the dirt on my shoes. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Her eyes softened slightly. "Do you know why I look like this? I spent the last 2 days visiting a shelter I helped fund. I slept on the streets last night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand the pain of those who do." Tears welled up in Ryan's eyes. "I'm sorry for what they did, ma'am. It wasn't right." Margaret turned to him, her expression softening. "You were the only one who spoke with kindness, even when your superior insulted me. What's your name?" "Ryan, ma'am." "Ryan," she said with a small smile, "you're the new assistant manager." The manager's mouth dropped open. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," Margaret said firmly. "And as for you, and everyone who stood by in silence, you're fired. Effective immediately." The receptionist burst into tears. The other employees began pleading for a second chance, but Margaret shook her head. A business built on arrogance and cruelty cannot serve the public. Let this be a lesson, not just for you, but for anyone who thinks wealth gives them the right to look down on others. Within an hour, the fired staff had packed their belongings and left. Ryan stood in the lobby, unsure what to say. Margaret looked around the grand hotel, her heart heavy but resolute. She turned to him and said, "Ryan, this hotel will now be known as the Haven Inn. A place where everyone, rich or poor, will be treated with dignity. I want you to help me run it." He nodded, still in awe. "I will, ma'am. I promise." Later that evening, Margaret sat in the same lobby where she'd been humiliated. This time, she wore the same tattered clothes, not out of necessity, but as a reminder. Guests passed by, smiling politely. Ryan brought her a cup of tea and said, "You know, ma'am, I think people will talk about this day for years." Margaret chuckled softly. "Let them. Maybe they'll learn something about kindness." And as the sun set beyond the hotel's glass doors, the old lady who was once judged for being dirty became the symbol of grace, power, and humanity, the woman who proved that true worth is never measured by appearance, but by heart.